Zimbabwe cash crisis worse. Talking about Venezuela once again. Systemic important banks. They removed the 1,000 thing right there called monetary awareness. Hey there. So today I thought I would do a little something different. And so as you see, I'm surrounded by what I consider to be an image of what some new Federal Reserve notes could look like in a case of a high inflation or borderline, not quite hyperinflation, but yet inflation enough to where the point of the normal 1, 5, 10, 20, 50, $100 bill no longer is suitable for daily transactions. And so over the last couple of days, I've actually been studying various emerging market economies, as well as just some looking at their money supply, looking at the currency issuance and things of that nature. And I've noticed a trend that since the Great Recession, all central banks and as well as all governments have responded with the idea of just expanding their monetary base, leading to higher inflation. And then here in the United States of America, you know, Jerome Powell's talking about the idea of needing to reach our inflation targets. And so just the word inflation is mentioned a lot more so in the mainstream media. And so it got me to wondering as to what if they met their inflation targets and it exceeded it by far, similar to what happened in the 1970s where we got up to 10, 11, 12% inflation. And during that time, I'm sure a lot of Americans were impacted by the increased cost of just living as well as just daily transactions and whatnot. And so being the visual aid person that I am, I decided to finally release these notes here that I've actually had in my possession for quite a while now. So I actually got this done, I think about 2 years ago. And I thought it was very timely to do this now, especially since over the last couple of days, I've been doing more research in regards to just the money supply, especially dealing with Argentina as well as Venezuela, as well as Zimbabwe, as well as Nigeria and Brazil. So you name it. And I'm looking at a lot of those graphs. And if you've actually followed me over on Twitter, and I'll go there briefly, I'll show you that over the last couple of days, I've just posted a couple of the M2 and M3 money supply for, here we have Argentina here. So one of the things I point out is the idea that as the money supply continued to increase, so did the denomination of their bills there. So now they have the 1,000 peso note, which is in circulation. And so it all stems from the fact that just a normal 1, 5, 20, 50, and 100 peso note no longer meets their needs there as far as being able to do transactions with. And so here's another picture here of the euro in regards to what's happening since the Great Recession there, whereas in depositor rates there is negative 0.4 there. And so basically people aren't getting paid interest for holding their money in banks there. And the one here is the Venezuela money supply, the M2. And so as you see here, it's very, very low up until the last decade or so, where it's spiked up to where the number is basically off the charts there. So that led me to think about what would happen in a worst case scenario if the Federal Reserve note was not the reserve standard of the world, and every note that was printed solely domestic dollars as opposed to being international reserves that other countries are forced to save and to use for transactions around the world. And so basically here in America, we have inflation here, but it's not in the conventional sense as far as consumer goods and whatnot. It's well beyond a 2% rate that the Federal Reserve is aiming for, but more so the inflation is showing up in assets such as the stock market, housing market, and things of that nature, where those prices are reflective of the easy money policy, as well as just the idea that our monetary base has been expanded as well, similar to what it's like for Brazil, Argentina, and all those emerging markets. But the only difference between what we're doing and what they're doing is that the world needs the Federal Reserve note, and no one needs those domestic currencies such as the bolivar and the peso. And so my thought was, what if we were just isolated and no longer wanted the dollar, and we were forced to live with our policies that's been implemented to this date? And that led me to the idea that inflation would clearly be visible in regards to our consumer goods and services, to where I believe that at some point we would need a currency with a couple of zeros behind it. And so I thought about that over the last 70, 80 years, the Federal Reserve note has been the primary currency around the world. For the most part, since 1913, we have yet to have any type of redenomination of currency. And so beyond just occasional updates with some images and whatnot, if you look around the world, other countries have had several issuing of new currencies, and they usually use the phrase new followed by whatever the old name was. Ideally, what's happening in Venezuela with the bolivar, they call it the new bolivar or forte bolivar, which means stronger bolivar. And it's actually the same one, just issued with a couple more zeros, and of which now, as of August 4th, they're going to be removing some of those zeros again. So it's just the idea that in this monetary world we're in now, there's so many things happening right now with debt being sky high, and inflation will be a result of all this debt As governments continue to borrow, central banks continue to print, commercial banks continue to lend, creating more currency in existence, and citizens continue to save these notes here. So basically, I wanted to share with you a little bit of what the redenomination issue is by going to Wikipedia and give you more information about what it is. And it says, redenomination is the process of changing the face value of banknotes or coins used in circulating currency. It may be done because inflation has made the currency unit so small that only large denominations of the currency are circulated. In such cases, the name of the currency may change, or the original name may be used with a temporary qualifier such as new. It says redenomination may be done for other reasons such as adopting a new currency, as with the euro, or decimalization. So if you scroll down a little bit, I'll actually leave a link below the video for you to find out more for yourself. But as you can see, inflationary, some of the leading candidates has been Zimbabwe. So they've went through several phases of hyperinflation there. And it's all within the last decade or so. As you see, February 2009, they had the $1 trillion note. So it goes down, goes into a little bit of historical aspect with the German Rentenmark from back in the day. It actually gives you a picture here. And so if you go down further, we had in 1994, the Brazilian real had some issues. And then go down to the very bottom is what really caught my attention. And so basically, these are the list of currency redenominations over the last couple of decades here. And a lot of countries here have gone through similar situations over and over and over again, all because their currencies are only needed within that country. And so governments, like they always do, tend to borrow, make a lot of promises, can't repay them back, inflate the currency, and the people suffer. And so they basically are issued new currencies continuously, losing out on all the purchasing power and everything that was saved in the older currency. And so here, Zimbabwe at the very top, we got the Chinese gold yuan, which took place back in 1940, 1948, Yugoslavian dinar, several years here. And then it gives you the cause of these redenominations, which all have to do with hyperinflation, inflation. Scroll down some more. We got the Argentino peso in 1983 was inflation. We have the Polish zloty, inflation. We got the new Guianan cedi, which is in 2007. Which was redenominated because of inflation. So you go on down, Peruvian cruzado, we got the Bulgarian, we got Zimbabwe again, we got the Icelandic krona in 1981 because of hyperinflation.
Is the next recession?
Recession will be a recession.
We're going to hit a recession.
The date of the next recession?
A U.S.-only recession typically lasts 8 to 10 months, but a lot of things about this particular one have not been typical. So
a crash is coming. Now, whether it's 6 months from now, 12 months, 36 months, no one knows.
I go to bed every night, I dream of another recession. If you know what to do, if you have the right plan to set up, you can make a lot of money from this.
Then we have here the United States dollar, which was implemented as Ecuador's primary currency because they ran into inflation issues back in 2000. So it replaced their national currency. So that really got me thinking about what would the notes look like here in the United States of America if we were to experience some type of inflation or hyperinflation and needed to add a couple zeros because, say, if you go down to the store, a loaf of bread no longer was $3, it ended up being $30 or something of that nature. Or say, for example, your light bill, which is roughly $100, might be $1,000. So they basically began issuing new currency notes in just a worst case type of scenario. So these notes here over my shoulder are just some ideas of what it would look like to add an extra 2 zeros to what is already our denominated currency in the form of the $1 bill, where we have George Washington, then we have the Abraham Lincoln with $5, then we got Alexander Hamilton with 2 zeros, as well as Andrew Jackson, and then we got Grant with another 2 zeros. So the idea that in a very high inflationary environment, these notes right here will be an example of a currency of some type that the United States of America would use if it wasn't the reserve currency of the world. But then just put yourself in the shoes of one of those countries that are just a domestic currency where no one needs it but the citizens there. And they saved up and had all their investments and everything tied into their local currencies before it's redenominated to these higher numbers of a 100, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000. Imagine if $100 was the biggest bill at that time. And so say, for example, for investment, say, or for retirement in that matter, say if you thought your ideal retirement amount was, say, was $400, $500, $600,000. And imagine if the currency was redenominated because inflation took off through the roof and they then came out with these new notes, basically removing all all the purchasing power that you had saved up until that point. Because if your highest note is, say, a $5,000 note, it'll be worth in comparison to if you have saved up 300, 400, or whatever the 100,000s might have been. It would definitely eat into that purchasing power drastically, because that 3, 4, 5, 600,000 that you set aside for savings would not be able to purchase anything near as to what it could have purchased years ago. So I just want to take a minute to share with you the idea that what if there was a chance that the inflation in the United States of America picked up to the point where there was a need for additional zeros added to the currency, and then it came out issuing some of this funny, colorful money like most central banks seem to do when the currency is redenominated. So if you just was to Google redenomination currencies or type in some currencies from areas that's been impacted by monetary crises, and you'll see that the paper was issued with additional zeros, and for whatever reason they added all this color to those notes as if that made people feel more comfortable and whatnot. So other than that, I would love to hear your thoughts on the idea of adding a few more zeros to Federal Reserve notes, and then the impact that would have on purchasing power, as it would wipe away everything that has been saved up to this point, because that is a reflection that the purchasing power is gone, which would usually be a sign that the monetary base has expanded well beyond what it is now. And of course, if you followed this channel before, you know, in my opinion, that after this next recession, monetary policy will then result in a currency crisis where there will be some type of event. Don't necessarily think it will be an issuing of new currency of this kind because we're the current reserve currency, but this is just an example of what could happen if we weren't currently the reserve currency of the world. Because in actuality, all the Federal Reserve notes that circulating outside this country, which are a lot more than what's inside now, will come back to roost. I don't think there'll be any time or even a need to issue any notes of this nature in a hyperinflationary environment where all those Federal Reserve notes that's currently issued come back to roost, just because the confidence will be lost and people will not want paper at all. But just want to get your thoughts on this matter here on these notes here. Leave a comment down below, and also join me tonight for an RTD Live Talk. Let's talk about this funny money and how in a very worst case scenario this could be something that we could see possibly. Anyway, see you later.